The morning mist hung heavy over the Montana woods when Rex started barking. Not his usual alert bark when deer crossed their path, but something primal, desperate. Marcus Thompson gripped his coffee mug tighter, watching his German shepherd pace frantically around the ancient oak tree that marked the edge of his property. Rex had never acted like this. In 8 years together, the dog had faced down bears without flinching. Now he whimpered, hackles raised, backing away from the massive tree trunk as if it harbored something evil. Marcus approached slowly, his retired detective instincts prickling. The oak showed an unnatural bulge 6 feet up, roughly the size of a grown man. Dark sap wept from cracks in the bark, releasing a smell that made his stomach turn. Not the clean scent of pine resin, but something organic and wrong. Rex's amber eyes locked onto his, pleading, warning. Marcus reached for his old police knife, knowing some secrets the earth keeps for 15 years. Others, it's ready to give up. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Marcus Thompson had built his life around routine. At 58, the former Cedar Falls police detective rose each morning at 6, brewed coffee strong enough to wake the dead, and walked the perimeter of his 10-acre property with Rex by his side. The ritual had kept him sane through the worst years of his life. Cedar Falls, Montana, population 3,200, was the kind of place where everyone knew your business before you did. Marcus had served the community for 30 years, earning respect as the detective who never gave up on a case. But that was before Sarah lost her battle with cancer 6 years ago. Before Emma died in that twisted metal wreck on Highway 2 15 years back. Just 16 years old and full of dreams, Rex had been Emma's dying wish. "Get a dog, Daddy," she'd whispered from her hospital bed, machines beeping around her like electronic mourners. Dogs don't leave you. Marcus had found Rex at the county shelter 3 months later, a German shepherd puppy with intelligent amber eyes that seemed to understand grief. The cabin sat 5 miles outside town, surrounded by towering pines and ancient oaks. Marcus had built it with his own hands after Sarah's funeral, needing distance from the sympathetic looks and whispered conversations that followed him through Cedar Falls streets. Out here, only Rex witnessed his bad days when the bottle called louder than common sense, when the silence pressed so heavy he could barely breathe. Rex wasn't just a pet, he was family. The dog possessed an intelligence that sometimes unsettled visitors, though Marcus had grown accustomed to feeling understood by his 4-legged companion. Rex knew when the nightmares came, padding silently to Marcus's bedside in the dark hours before dawn. He knew when the anniversary dates approached, staying closer than usual as if sensing his master's need for comfort. The German shepherd had never shown fear. Not when black bears wandered through their yard. Not during thunderstorms that shook the cabin's foundation. Not even when the occasional drunk from town stumbled onto their property looking for trouble. Rex faced everything with calm courage, positioning himself between Marcus and any perceived threat, which made this morning's behavior so deeply unsettling. The ancient oak had stood sentinel on the property line for over a century, its massive trunk scarred by lightning and weather but enduring. Marcus had walked past it thousands of times without incident. But something had changed. The unnatural bulge in its trunk seemed to pulse with malevolent life, and Rex's primal terror suggested they'd stumbled onto something that had been waiting patiently in the darkness, ready to surface after years of patient concealment. Marcus approached the oak tree with the methodical caution that had kept him alive through 3 decades of police work. Rex retreated to a safe distance, ears flat against his head, every muscle in his body radiating tension. The German shepherd's distress was so profound that Marcus felt his own heart rate spike in response. The bulge in the tree's trunk was roughly 5 feet in height and 3 feet wide, stretching the ancient bark until deep fissures had opened like wounds. Dark resin seeped from these cracks, but the substance didn't smell like normal tree sap. It carried an organic odor that reminded Marcus uncomfortably of the morgue during his early days on the force. He pulled the folding knife from his pocket, a tool he'd carried since his first day as a patrol officer 35 years ago. The blade was still sharp, maintained with the same attention to detail that had defined his entire career. Marcus positioned himself carefully, aware that Rex's continued agitation meant they weren't alone in these woods. The first cut into the bark released a stronger wave of that wrong smell, causing Rex to whimper and back even further away. Marcus had learned long ago to trust his partner's instincts, whether that partner walked on 2 legs or 4. He paused, scanning the tree line for any sign of watchers, then made a deeper incision. Fabric emerged from the cut. Old fabric, darkened with age and moisture, but clearly recognizable as clothing. Marcus's blood chilled as he realized what he was looking at. Someone had been sealed inside this tree, and the wood had grown around them over the years, creating a natural tomb. His hands shaking slightly, Marcus widened the opening. More cloth became visible, along with something metallic that caught the morning light. With growing horror, he recognized the shape and gleam of a badge, a police badge. Marcus stepped back from the tree, his breath coming in short gasps. In all his years of law enforcement, he'd seen plenty of death, but this discovery hit him with unexpected force. Someone had been murdered and hidden here, possibly years ago, and the killer had counted on the tree's growth to conceal their crime forever. Rex's barking intensified, no longer directed at the tree but toward the forest beyond. Marcus spun around, hand instinctively reaching for the service weapon he no longer carried. Through the undergrowth he caught a glimpse of movement. Someone was out there, watching. The metallic object in the tree wasn't just any badge. As Marcus forced himself to look closer, despite every instinct screaming at him to run, he could make out the familiar shield shape of the Cedar Falls Police Department. The number was partially obscured by debris, but he could make out enough digits to send ice through his veins. Badge number 247. Detective Jake Morrison. Marcus sat down heavily on a fallen log, the knife slipping from nerveless fingers. Jake had been his partner for 8 years, his best friend, the closest thing to a brother he'd ever had. Jake had disappeared 15 years ago while working a case, vanishing without a trace on a routine investigation. The department had searched for weeks, the FBI had been called in, but no sign of Jake Morrison was ever found. The official conclusion was that Jake had met with an accident in the wilderness, possibly falling into a ravine or becoming lost in the vast Montana forests. His body was presumed to be somewhere in the millions of acres of wild country that surrounded Cedar Falls, and eventually the search was called off. Jake's wife Helen had waited 5 years before having him declared legally dead. But Jake hadn't died in an accident. He'd been murdered, and someone had taken great care to ensure his body would never be found. The tree had been younger 15 years ago, small enough that someone could have hollowed out a space in the trunk and placed Jake's body inside, then waited for natural growth to seal the evidence. Marcus forced himself to stand, to approach the tree again despite Rex's protests. Using a small flashlight from his pocket, he peered into the cavity his cuts had opened. Jake's service weapon was there, along with what looked like a notebook or journal. The killer had placed everything inside the tree, turning Jake's final resting place into a macabre time capsule. The sound of an approaching vehicle made both Marcus and Rex freeze. A patrol car was coming up the dirt road to his cabin, moving slowly, deliberately. Marcus quickly gathered the evidence he could reach, stuffing Jake's badge and notebook into his jacket pockets. He couldn't let whoever was coming see what he'd discovered, not until he knew who to trust. Rex bounded to his side as the patrol car came into view through the trees. The dog's protective instincts were in full force now, positioning himself between Marcus and any potential threat. Marcus recognized the vehicle as belonging to the Cedar Falls Sheriff's Department, but he couldn't yet make out who was driving. As the car pulled to a stop near his cabin, Marcus felt the weight of Jake's badge in his pocket like a burning coal. His best friend's murder had been covered up for 15 years, and now someone was coming to check on him just minutes after he'd made the discovery. The timing was too convenient to be coincidental. Someone knew he'd found Jake's body, someone had been watching, and that someone was about to step out of an official police vehicle, wearing a badge that might hide the heart of a killer. Deputy Carol Anderson stepped out of the patrol car with the measured movements of someone who'd been in law enforcement for over a decade. Marcus recognized her immediately. She'd joined the Cedar Falls force about 5 years ago, transferring from Billings with commendations for her work in narcotics. She was competent, thorough, and had always treated Marcus with the respect due a veteran detective, even after his retirement. But today, something felt different. Rex's hackles remained raised as she approached, his amber eyes tracking her every movement with an intensity that made Marcus's stomach tighten. The German Shepherd had always been friendly with Anderson during her previous visits to check on Marcus's welfare. Now the dog positioned himself protectively between his master and the deputy, a low growl rumbling in his chest. "Morning, Marcus," Anderson called out, her hand resting casually on her duty belt. "Got a call about some kind of disturbance out here." Neighbor reported hearing what sounded like gunshots about an hour ago. Marcus felt Jake's badge burning like a coal against his ribs where he'd tucked it inside his jacket. There were no neighbors within 3 miles of his cabin, and Anderson knew it. She was fishing, trying to determine what he might have discovered. "No gunshots here, Carol," Marcus replied, keeping his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. "Rex and I were just taking our morning walk. You know how sound carries in these woods? Probably a hunter further up the ridge." Anderson's eyes swept the area around the oak tree, lingering on the disturbed earth where Marcus had been working. "Mind if I take a look around? Protocol, you understand. Have to file a complete report." Rex's growl deepened, and Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. In all the years he'd known Anderson, she'd never been this formal with him. They'd shared coffee on his porch, talked about cases, laughed about department politics. Now she was treating him like a suspect. "Of course," Marcus said, stepping casually away from the tree. "Though I'm not sure what you expect to find. Rex here was probably just chasing a squirrel or something. You know how dogs get excited." As Anderson moved toward the oak, Marcus noticed she kept her right hand near her sidearm. The observation triggered his old detective instincts, and he began cataloging details with the automatic precision of someone trained to read dangerous situations. Anderson's patrol car was positioned to block the main access road. Her radio was turned down low, unusual for someone on an active call. Most telling of all, she hadn't called in her arrival at his location, standard procedure for any welfare check. Rex refused to move away from Marcus's side despite Anderson's attempts to coax him over with her usual friendly tone. The dog's protective stance was absolute, his training as Marcus's companion overriding any previous socialization with the deputy. "Rex seems a bit agitated today," Anderson observed, crouching near the base of the oak tree. "Everything okay with him?" "Just one of those days," Marcus replied, watching as she examined the ground around the tree's base. "Sometimes he gets spooked by scents we can't detect. Probably an old animal carcass somewhere nearby." Anderson stood up, brushing dirt from her knees, and Marcus caught a glimpse of something that made his blood freeze. Tucked into her duty belt, barely visible beneath her jacket, was a small digital recorder. She was documenting this conversation, treating him as a subject of investigation rather than a fellow law enforcement officer seeking assistance. "Marcus, I need to ask you something," Anderson said, her tone shifting to the careful cadence of an interrogation. "Have you been feeling okay lately?" "Some folks in town have been concerned about you. Living out here alone, losing Sarah and Emma the way you did, it's a lot for anyone to handle." The question was designed to undermine his credibility, to establish a narrative of an unstable retiree whose claims might not be reliable. Marcus recognized the technique because he'd used it himself during interrogations. Anderson was building a case, laying groundwork for something bigger. "I'm doing fine, Carol. Rex keeps me company, and I stay busy with projects around the property. Is there something specific you're concerned about?" Anderson's hand moved closer to her weapon as she spoke. "We've had reports of someone digging around old crime scenes, disturbing evidence. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" The question was a trap, designed to see if Marcus would reveal what he'd discovered, but it also told him something crucial. Anderson knew about Jake's body in the tree. She might not know that Marcus had found it, but she was aware of its existence. That meant she was either involved in Jake's murder or working for someone who was. Rex suddenly stiffened, his attention shifting to the forest behind Anderson's patrol car. Marcus followed the dog's gaze and caught a glimpse of movement in the undergrowth. They weren't alone out here. Anderson had backup positioned in the woods, people who'd been watching and waiting. "You know, Carol," Marcus said carefully, "I think I'll make some fresh coffee. Why don't you come up to the cabin and we can talk more comfortably? It's getting cold out here." Anderson hesitated, clearly torn between maintaining her cover and accepting what appeared to be a friendly invitation. Marcus was betting that she wanted to see inside his cabin to determine what evidence he might have collected and whether he'd contacted anyone about his discovery. "That sounds good," she finally agreed. "I could use some coffee." As they walked toward the cabin, Rex maintained his protective position, never letting Anderson get behind Marcus. The German Shepherd's instincts were screaming danger, and Marcus had learned to trust those instincts completely. Whatever was happening here, Carol Anderson was at the center of it, and Jake Morrison's 15-year-old murder was about to claim another victim, unless Marcus could figure out who to trust and how to survive the next few hours. The weight of Jake's badge pressed against his ribs like a promise that demanded fulfillment. His best friend deserved justice, and Marcus would see that he got it, even if it cost him everything. Inside the cabin, Marcus moved with deliberate calm while his mind raced through possibilities. He needed to buy time, gather information, and most importantly, find a way to contact help without alerting Anderson to his suspicions. Rex positioned himself near the kitchen doorway, never taking his eyes off the deputy as she examined the cabin's interior with the practiced gaze of someone conducting surveillance. "Nice place," Anderson commented, her fingers trailing along the mantelpiece where Marcus kept photos of Sarah and Emma. "Must get lonely out here, though. When's the last time you had visitors?" The question was another probe, designed to determine if Marcus had shared his discovery with anyone. He measured coffee into the pot, using the familiar routine to steady his nerves. "Not many people make the drive out here. Suits me fine." Anderson picked up a framed photograph of Emma at 16, taken just weeks before the accident. She was beautiful. "I heard she wanted to be a veterinarian." "She loved animals," Marcus replied, watching Rex's reaction to Anderson's presence. The German Shepherd remained tense, his protective instincts overriding years of socialization. Dogs, Marcus knew, could sense things humans missed. Rex was telling him something vital about Deputy Anderson, and he needed to listen. "That's probably where you got the idea for Rex," Anderson continued, setting down the photo. "Emma would have loved him. Marcus poured 2 cups of coffee, his hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. She actually suggested I get a dog, said it would be good company. Anderson accepted the coffee but didn't drink it, instead using the cup to warm her hands. Smart girl, dogs are loyal. They don't betray trust like people do. The comment carried an edge that made Marcus look up sharply. Anderson was studying him with an intensity that had nothing to do with casual conversation. She was evaluating him, measuring his responses, trying to determine how much he knew and how much of a threat he represented. Speaking of loyalty, Anderson said, settling into the chair across from Marcus's kitchen table, I've been thinking about Jake Morrison lately. You two were close, weren't you? Marcus felt Jake's badge pressing against his ribs like a burning coal. Jake was a good partner, a good friend. His disappearance hit the whole department hard. 15 years is a long time, Anderson mused, watching Marcus over the rim of her coffee cup. People sometimes wonder what really happened to him, whether he just walked away from his life, started over somewhere else. Jake would never abandon Helen and the kids, Marcus said firmly. Whatever happened to him, it wasn't voluntary. Anderson's smile was thin, calculating. How can you be so sure? People change. Maybe he got tired of the job, tired of the responsibility. Maybe he found something more appealing than small-town police work. The insinuation was clear. Anderson was suggesting Jake had been corrupt, that his disappearance was connected to criminal activity. Marcus recognized the tactic, the deliberate attempt to sully Jake's reputation and deflect attention from the real circumstances of his death. Jake was as honest as they come, Marcus replied. If someone suggests otherwise, they're either lying or misinformed. Anderson set down her coffee cup with a sharp click against the saucer. That's an interesting perspective. Very loyal. But loyalty can be dangerous, Marcus. Sometimes it blinds us to uncomfortable truths. Rex suddenly rose to his feet, a low growl rumbling in his chest as he stared out the kitchen window. Marcus followed the dog's gaze and saw movement in the tree line. Dark shapes were positioning themselves around the cabin, closing off escape routes. Anderson had indeed brought backup, and they were moving into position for whatever came next. "Expecting company?" Anderson asked, noting the direction of Marcus's attention. "Just Rex being Rex," Marcus replied, but his hand moved instinctively toward the drawer where he kept his old service weapon. "He gets nervous when strangers are around." Anderson's hand dropped to her sidearm. "Strangers? I don't see any strangers." The pretense was crumbling. Marcus could see in Anderson's eyes that the time for subtlety had passed. She knew he'd discovered something at the oak tree, and she was here to ensure he couldn't share that information with anyone else. "You know, Marcus," Anderson said, rising from her chair, "I think we need to have a more honest conversation about what you found this morning, about what you think you know." Marcus remained seated, projecting calm while his mind calculated distances and angles. The service weapon in the drawer was 3 feet away. Anderson's gun was already within easy reach. Rex was positioned between them, ready to act if his master was threatened. "I'm not sure what you mean," Marcus said carefully. Anderson pulled out her cell phone and showed him a photograph. The image showed Marcus at the oak tree, cutting into the bark with his knife. Someone had been watching from the forest, documenting his discovery. "We've been monitoring this location for weeks," Anderson admitted. "Ever since we received intelligence that someone might be sniffing around old cases, asking questions, disturbing things that should stay buried." Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. "How long have you known about Jake?" "Long enough to understand that some secrets are worth protecting. Jake Morrison was getting too close to things that could have destroyed this entire community. People he was investigating, people who'd worked hard to build something good here." "Good?" Marcus's voice rose despite his efforts to remain calm. "Jake, was murdered. My best friend was killed and stuffed inside a tree like garbage. You call that good?" Anderson's hand rested on her weapon now, no longer pretending this was a friendly visit. Jake was going to expose operations that funded this department, that brought money into Cedar Falls. He was going to destroy lives and careers over some misguided sense of justice. "Justice isn't misguided," Marcus said, slowly rising from his chair. "It's what separates us from the animals." Rex tensed, sensing the escalating danger. The German Shepherd's training kicked in, positioning himself for maximum protection of his master while maintaining awareness of potential threats from multiple directions. "Animals are honest about what they are," Anderson replied. "They don't pretend to be something they're not." Jake pretended to be a crusader, but he was really just naive and dangerous. Marcus reached the moment of decision. He could continue the charade, pretend ignorance, and hope Anderson would leave. But Rex's behavior told him they were surrounded, that this conversation was a prelude to something much worse. Anderson hadn't come here to investigate a disturbance. She'd come to clean up a problem. "Who killed him?" Marcus asked directly. "Who put Jake in that tree?" Anderson's smile was cold. Someone who understood that the greater good sometimes requires difficult choices. Someone who knew that one man's life was a small price to pay for protecting an entire community. The admission hung in the air between them like a challenge. Anderson had essentially confessed to knowledge of Jake's murder, if not direct involvement. Marcus felt the weight of 15 years of grief and guilt settling on his shoulders. He'd failed his partner, failed his friend, and now he had a chance to make it right. "Jake had evidence," Marcus said. "Notes, recordings, proof of corruption. That's why he had to die." "Evidence that would have destroyed good people," Anderson replied. "People who were using unconventional methods to fund essential services." Jake couldn't see the bigger picture. Marcus understood now. Jake had uncovered a drug operation that was being protected by local law enforcement, possibly with profits being funneled back into department resources or personal accounts. When Jake threatened to expose the arrangement, he'd been eliminated to protect the conspiracy. "Where's the evidence now?" Marcus asked. Anderson's smile widened. "Safe, secure, where it can't hurt anyone else." The sound of footsteps on the cabin's front porch announced the arrival of Anderson's backup. Rex's hackles rose as he detected multiple people approaching from different directions. Marcus realized with growing dread that he and Rex were trapped, surrounded by corrupt officers who'd already killed once to protect their secrets. "You don't have to do this," Marcus said. "Whatever Jake found, whatever happened 15 years ago, it doesn't have to happen again." Anderson drew her weapon, pointing it steadily at Marcus's chest. "Actually, it does, because you found Jake, and now you know too much. Just like he did." Rex stepped forward, placing himself directly between the gun and his master. The German Shepherd's courage in the face of mortal danger reminded Marcus of everything he'd learned about loyalty, sacrifice, and doing what was right regardless of the cost. The cabin door opened, and two more figures entered. Marcus recognized them both, Deputy Tom Bradley and, to his shock, Chief Robert Williams himself. Williams was a respected 20-year veteran, a man Marcus had considered a mentor and friend. "Hello, Marcus," Williams said sadly. "I wish it hadn't come to this." Chief Williams closed the cabin door behind him with the deliberate care of a man who'd orchestrated this moment many times in his mind. His weathered face carried the weight of 20 years in law enforcement, but his eyes held something Marcus had never seen before. The cold calculation of a predator cornering prey. "You always were too thorough for your own good," Williams said, removing his hat and setting it on Marcus's kitchen counter. "Even in retirement, you can't stop being a detective." Marcus felt the world shifting beneath his feet. Williams had been his mentor, The man who'd guided him through his early years on the force, who'd stood beside him at Sarah's funeral, who'd offered comfort during the darkest days after Emma's death. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound. "Bob," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper, "tell me you weren't involved in Jake's death." Williams sighed heavily, the sound of a man carrying burdens he'd never wanted to bear. "Jake was my friend too, Marcus. You think I wanted him dead? You think any of us did?" Rex remained positioned between Marcus and the three officers, his hackles raised, a low growl rumbling continuously in his chest. The German shepherd's protective instincts were in overdrive, sensing the mortal danger surrounding his master. "But you killed him anyway," Marcus stated, the pieces falling into place with horrible clarity. "We tried to reason with him," Deputy Bradley interjected, his voice defensive. "We explained how things worked, how the money we were protecting was funding equipment, training, community programs. Jake wouldn't listen." Williams held up a hand, silencing Bradley. "Jake discovered our arrangement with certain elements in the community. Money was changing hands, yes, but not for personal enrichment. Every dollar went back into making Cedar Falls a better place." "Drug money," Marcus said flatly. "You were protecting drug dealers. We were managing an inevitable problem," Williams corrected. "Drugs were going to flow through this area regardless of what we did. At least our arrangement ensured the trade was controlled, predictable, and profitable for the community." Anderson shifted her weight, her weapon still trained on Marcus. "The money funded the new school computers, the senior center renovation, the Christmas toy drive for underprivileged kids. Jake was going to destroy all of that for some abstract principle." Marcus stared at Williams in disbelief. "You're justifying murder by talking about Christmas toys?" "I'm explaining reality," Williams replied calmly. "Federal funding was being cut. State budgets were shrinking. We found a way to supplement our resources without raising taxes or cutting services. Jake wanted to throw that away." "Jake wanted to uphold his oath," Marcus said, his voice rising. "To protect and serve, not to profit from criminal activity." Williams's expression hardened. "And where did his oath get him? Dead at 34, leaving behind a widow and 2 young children. Sometimes idealism is a luxury we can't afford." Rex suddenly tensed, his attention shifting toward the cabin's rear window. Marcus followed the dog's gaze and saw additional figures moving through the forest. Williams hadn't just brought backup. He'd brought an army. The cabin was completely surrounded. "How many officers are involved in this?" Marcus demanded. "Enough," Williams said simply. "People who understand that the world isn't black and white, that sometimes good people have to make hard choices." Marcus thought about the men and women he'd worked alongside for 30 years, wondering how many of them had been bought, how many had chosen compromise over principle. The corruption ran deeper than he'd imagined, poisoning the institution he'd devoted his life to serving. "Jake had evidence," Marcus said. "Photos, recordings, documentation of your arrangement. That's why he had to die." Anderson smiled coldly. "Jake was always thorough, too thorough. He spent months gathering evidence, building his case. He thought he was going to be a hero." "What happened to the evidence?" "Destroyed," Williams said. "Most of it, anyway. We kept some items for insurance purposes in case anyone else got curious about Jake's disappearance." Marcus realized with growing horror that Williams was admitting to murder with casual indifference. The man who'd taught him about justice and integrity was revealing himself as a calculating killer who'd eliminated his own detective to protect a criminal conspiracy. "The tree," Marcus said. "That was your idea?" Williams nodded slowly. "Jake loved these woods. He used to hunt up here when we were younger. It seemed fitting that he should rest somewhere he'd found peace. You stuffed him inside a living tree like he was garbage." "We gave him a burial that would last forever," Williams corrected. "The tree became his monument, growing stronger each year, keeping his secret safe. Rex's growling intensified as William stepped closer to Marcus. The German shepherd's loyalty was absolute. He would die protecting his master, and everyone in the room knew it. "The question now," Williams continued, "is what we do about you. You've discovered something that was meant to stay hidden. You possess knowledge that could destroy careers, lives, everything we've built here." "I won't let you cover this up again," Marcus said firmly. "Jake deserves justice. His family deserves the truth." Anderson laughed bitterly. "Justice? Truth? Do you know what the truth would do to this community? Half the city council would be implicated. The mayor, the district attorney, business leaders who facilitated our arrangement, the entire power structure of Cedar Falls would collapse." "Maybe it should," Marcus replied. "Maybe starting over would be better than living with this corruption." William shook his head sadly. "You always were naive, Marcus, just like Jake. You see the world in absolutes, good versus evil, right versus wrong. Reality is more complicated." "Murder isn't complicated," Marcus said. "It's wrong. Period." "Jake's death was regrettable but necessary," William stated coldly. "He was going to destroy everything we'd worked to build. His idealism would have cost hundreds of people their jobs, their livelihoods, their future." Marcus looked around the cabin that had been his sanctuary, surrounded by men he'd once trusted with his life. The weight of Jake's badge pressed against his ribs, a reminder of promises broken and justice denied. "You're going to kill me too," Marcus said. It wasn't a question. Williams's expression remained neutral. "We're going to ensure that Jake's secret remains safe, that the community we've protected continues to thrive. Your death will be tragic but understandable. A retired cop, depressed over the loss of his family, takes his own life in the isolation of the woods. People will ask questions. I have friends in the department, contacts in other agencies." "You've been living as a hermit for years," Anderson pointed out. "You've isolated yourself, shown signs of depression and instability. Your suicide will be sad, but not surprising." Marcus realized they'd been planning this for a long time, studying his habits, building a narrative that would explain his death without raising suspicions. They'd used his grief against him, his isolation as cover for murder. Rex suddenly barked sharply, his attention focused on something outside. Marcus heard the distant sound of a vehicle approaching on the access road. Williams frowned, clearly not expecting additional arrivals. "Check that," Williams ordered Bradley. As Bradley moved toward the window, Marcus saw his opportunity. The momentary distraction had shifted the tactical balance in the room. Rex sensed the change in tension and prepared to act on his master's signal. Marcus looked down at his faithful companion, the German shepherd who'd been Emma's final gift to him, who'd provided comfort through the darkest years of his life. Rex's amber eyes met his, and Marcus saw absolute trust, unconditional loyalty, and the willingness to sacrifice everything for the bond they shared. "I'm sorry, boy," Marcus whispered, knowing that whatever happened next would cost them both everything they'd found in each other. The approaching vehicle grew louder, and Williams's carefully orchestrated plan began to unravel. Someone was coming who wasn't part of the conspiracy, someone who might witness what was about to happen in the cabin. The chief's expression darkened as he realized his timeline had been compromised. "We need to move this along," Williams said, raising his own weapon. Now, the sound of the approaching vehicle grew louder, and Marcus recognized the distinctive rumble of an old Ford pickup truck. His heart sank as he realized who was coming up the access road. Helen Morrison, Jake's widow, made this drive every month on the anniversary of her husband's disappearance, bringing flowers to leave at the spot where his patrol car had last been seen. Williams cursed under his breath, realizing his carefully planned execution was about to be complicated by an unexpected witness. "Bradley, get out there and turn her away. Tell her the road's closed for maintenance." But it was too late. Helen's truck had already crested the hill, bringing her within sight of the multiple police vehicles parked around Marcus's cabin. She would see the activity, would know something significant was happening at the place where she came to mourn her husband. Rex's barking intensified as he sensed the escalating tension in the room. The German shepherd positioned himself directly between Marcus and Williams, his hackles raised, teeth bared in a display of absolute protective fury. Every instinct the dog possessed was screaming danger. "Change of plans," Williams said grimly, keeping his weapon trained on Marcus. "We'll have to stage this differently. A confrontation with an unstable retiree who'd discovered something about Jake's disappearance. Helen arrives to find tragedy." Marcus felt ice in his veins as he understood Williams' new plan. The chief intended to kill them both, Marcus and Helen, then claim they'd been eliminated by some unknown threat related to Jake's old case. It would be messy, but Williams had the resources to control the narrative. "She's innocent," Marcus said desperately. "Helen has nothing to do with this. Let her go." "Helen Morrison has been asking questions for 15 years, Anderson replied coldly. "She's never accepted that Jake simply disappeared. She's been a problem waiting to explode." Through the window, Marcus could see Helen's truck pulling to a stop near the patrol cars. She was getting out, her movement showing the confusion of someone who'd encountered something unexpected. Helen was a small woman in her early 50s, still attractive despite the years of grief that had lined her face. She'd never remarried, never stopped believing that someday she'd learn what happened to Jake. "Jake loved her," Marcus said, playing for time as his mind raced through options. He talked about her constantly, their plans, their dreams, the life they were building together. "Jake should have thought about that before he decided to be a hero," Williams replied without emotion. "Some people are more important than others. Some lives matter more than idealistic principles." Rex suddenly lunged forward, not at Williams but toward the kitchen drawer where Marcus kept his old service weapon. The German shepherd's intelligence was remarkable. He understood the tactical situation and was trying to help his master access the tools needed to fight back. Anderson swung her weapon toward Rex, but Marcus moved faster than he had in years. The adrenaline of mortal danger gave him speed and strength he'd forgotten he possessed. He dove for the drawer, his fingers closing around the familiar grip of his Glock 40 caliber pistol just as gunfire erupted in the confined space of the cabin. The first shot came from Anderson's weapon, aimed at Rex but going wide as Marcus's sudden movement threw off her aim. The bullet splintered the wooden cabinets, sending debris flying through the kitchen. Rex yelped but continued moving, using his speed and agility to avoid the follow-up shots. Marcus rolled behind the kitchen island, his service weapon finally in his hands after months of peaceful retirement. The muscle memory of crisis situations flooded back, 30 years of training overriding fear and doubt. He was a cop again, fighting for his life and the lives of innocent people. Williams fired twice, the bullets punching through the kitchen island's wooden surface, missing Marcus by inches. "You're only making this harder on yourself," the chief shouted. "And on Helen, she's going to die because of your stubborn pride." Outside, Marcus could hear Helen Morrison screaming. She'd heard the gunfire and was calling for help, her voice carrying across the Montana wilderness like a beacon of hope. Someone else would hear her, would come to investigate, would find evidence of Williams's conspiracy. Rex moved like a ghost through the cabin, using furniture and shadows to avoid the officer's attempts to kill him. The German shepherd's protective instincts had evolved into something primal and fierce. He wasn't just defending his master, he was fighting for his family, for the bond that had sustained them both through years of grief and isolation. "Give up, Marcus," Williams called out. "You're outnumbered and outgunned. We can make this quick and painless, or we can let it drag out. Your choice." Marcus thought about Emma, about the promise he'd made to her dying request to get a dog for companionship and protection. Rex had been both of those things and more. The German Shepherd had given him a reason to keep living when the grief threatened to drown him. Now Rex was risking everything to protect the man who'd saved him from the shelter. "Jake trusted you," Marcus shouted back, trying to keep Williams talking while he planned his next move. "He looked up to you, respected you. How could you betray him like that?" "Jake forced my hand," Williams replied, his voice carrying genuine regret. "I gave him every opportunity to walk away, to accept how things worked. He chose ideology over pragmatism." Anderson was moving to flank Marcus's position, using the cover of overturned furniture to work her way around the kitchen island. Marcus caught a glimpse of her reflection in the stainless steel refrigerator and adjusted his position accordingly. Rex suddenly appeared behind Anderson, moving with the silent grace of his wolf ancestors. The German Shepherd launched himself at the deputy, 80 pounds of muscle and fury driven by absolute loyalty to his master. Anderson spun toward the threat, but Rex was already inside her guard, his powerful jaws clamping down on her gun arm. Anderson screamed as Rex's teeth found purchase, her weapon flying across the cabin floor. The German Shepherd's attack created the distraction Marcus needed. He rose from cover, his service weapon steady in a two-handed grip, the front sight centered on Williams's chest. "Drop your weapon," Marcus commanded, his voice carrying the authority of 3 decades in law enforcement. "It's over, Bob." Williams hesitated, his own gun wavering between Marcus and Rex. The chief's face showed the calculation of a man weighing his options, looking for an angle that would let him salvage his plan. That moment of hesitation cost him everything. Bradley, panicking at the chaos erupting around him, made the fatal mistake of trying to shoot Rex while the dog was still engaged with Anderson. The bullet intended for the German Shepherd struck Anderson in the shoulder, spinning her around and into Rex's path. The cabin erupted in violence as Rex, confused by Anderson's fall and the smell of blood, redirected his protective fury toward the nearest threat. Bradley screamed as the German Shepherd's training took over, the dog's powerful jaws seeking to neutralize the danger to his pack. In the chaos, Williams made his final play, swinging his weapon toward Marcus with deadly intent. But Rex, even in the midst of his attack on Bradley, somehow sensed the threat to his master. The German Shepherd abandoned his current target and threw himself between Williams and Marcus just as the chief's finger tightened on the trigger. The gunshot echoed through the cabin like thunder, and Rex's body jerked as Williams's bullet found its mark. The German Shepherd's momentum carried him into his master's arms, 80 pounds of loyal heart and protective spirit collapsing against Marcus's chest. Blood immediately began seeping through Rex's thick coat, staining Marcus's shirt with the life force of the only family he had left. "Rex, no," Marcus whispered, catching his companion as the dog's legs gave out. The German Shepherd's amber eyes found his master's face, still alert despite the grievous wound in his chest. Rex's tail gave one weak wag, as if to say he'd done his job, he'd protected his pack. And that was all that mattered. Williams stood frozen, his smoking weapon still pointed at the spot where Rex had intercepted the bullet meant for Marcus. For a moment the cabin was utterly silent except for Rex's labored breathing and the distant sound of Helen Morrison's continued screams from outside. "You killed him," Marcus said, his voice breaking as he pressed his hands against Rex's wound, feeling the dog's blood flowing warm between his fingers. "You killed the best of us." William's face showed something Marcus had never seen before, genuine remorse. The chief lowered his weapon slightly, staring at the wounded German Shepherd with the expression of a man who'd finally crossed a line he couldn't uncross. "I didn't mean—" Williams started, then stopped. The dog shouldn't have interfered. Rex's breathing was becoming more labored, each breath a struggle that sent waves of pain through Marcus's heart. The German shepherd, who'd pulled him back from the brink of despair after losing Sarah and Emma, was dying in his arms. Another casualty of the corruption that had already claimed Jake Morrison. Anderson groaned from where she'd fallen, clutching her wounded shoulder. Bradley lay motionless near the overturned kitchen table, either unconscious or dead from Rex's attack. The cabin that had been Marcus's sanctuary was now a battlefield littered with the cost of seeking justice. "Look what you've done," Marcus said, his voice thick with grief and rage. "Look at the destruction you've caused. Jake, Rex, how many more people have to die to protect your dirty money?" William seemed to age before Marcus's eyes, the weight of 15 years of cover-ups and compromises finally showing on his weathered features. "I never wanted any of this. It started small, just looking the other way on minor infractions in exchange for community donations. It grew into something I couldn't control." "You could have stopped it," Marcus accused, still pressing futilely against Rex's wound. "At any point, you could have chosen to do the right thing." "The right thing?" Williams laughed bitterly. "Do you know what the right thing would have cost? Dozens of careers destroyed, families ruined, the entire community's trust in law enforcement shattered. I chose the lesser evil." Rex's eyes were growing glassy, but they remained fixed on Marcus's face with the absolute trust that had defined their relationship. The German shepherd's loyalty had been unconditional from the day Marcus brought him home from the shelter, and even now, dying from a bullet that should have killed his master, Rex showed no regret for his sacrifice. "You chose convenience over conscience," Marcus said. "You chose money over morality. And now you're adding murder to your list of sins." Outside, the sound of approaching vehicles announced the arrival of additional help. Helen Morrison's screams had carried far enough to alert other residents in the area, and Marcus could hear the distinctive sound of emergency sirens growing closer. Williams heard them too, and his face hardened with resolve. "This ends here, Marcus. One way or another, this ends here." The chief raised his weapon again, pointing it directly at Marcus's head. "Stand up." "Move away from the dog." Marcus looked down at Rex, seeing the life fading from those intelligent amber eyes that had been his anchor through years of grief and loneliness. The German shepherd had given him everything: companionship, purpose, unconditional love, and now his life. Marcus couldn't abandon him in these final moments. "No," Marcus said simply. "If you're going to kill me, you'll have to do it while I'm holding him." William's hand trembled slightly as he maintained his aim. "Don't be stupid, Marcus. Don't make this harder than it has to be." "You already made it as hard as possible when you murdered Jake," Marcus replied. "When you chose corruption over justice. When you shot the most innocent soul in this room." Rex's breathing grew shallower, each exhale weaker than the last. Marcus could feel the German shepherd's heartbeat slowing beneath his hands, the strong rhythm that had comforted him through countless sleepless nights, finally faltering. "Good boy, Rex," Marcus whispered, his voice breaking. "Such a good boy. Emma would be so proud of you." Williams's resolve seemed to waver as he watched the dying dog and the grief-stricken man holding him. Even a corrupt cop retained some human decency, some recognition of the bond between a man and his loyal companion. The sound of vehicles pulling up outside grew louder, accompanied by the slam of car doors and shouted commands. Help was arriving, but Marcus knew it might be too late for Rex. The German shepherd's eyes were losing focus, his breathing becoming irregular. "I'm sorry," Williams said suddenly, and for a moment his voice carried genuine regret. "I'm sorry about Rex. I'm sorry about all of it." Marcus looked up at the man who'd been his mentor, his chief, someone he'd respected and trusted for decades. Williams had fallen so far from the idealistic young sergeant who'd taught Marcus about police work, about serving the community with honor and integrity. "You can still do the right thing," Marcus said. "Put down the gun. Confess to what you've done. Let Jake's family finally have closure." Williams' hand shook as he maintained his aim. Too late for that. Too many people involved, too many lives at stake. If this comes out, it destroys everything. Rex's tail moved one final time, a barely perceptible wag that spoke of love transcending pain. The German shepherd's eyes found Marcus's face one last time, and in that gaze was everything that had made their bond sacred: trust, loyalty, forgiveness, and the kind of love that asked for nothing in return. "Rex," Marcus whispered as the light faded from those amber eyes. "My good boy." The German shepherd, who had been Emma's final gift, who had pulled Marcus back from the brink of despair, who had given him purpose and companionship and unconditional love, was gone. The silence in the cabin was profound, broken only by the approaching sounds of rescue vehicles and Williams's labored breathing. Marcus gently closed Rex's eyes, his hands shaking with grief and rage. When he looked up at Williams, the chief saw something that made him step backward. The broken, grieving retiree was gone, replaced by the dangerous man Marcus had been during his 30 years as a cop, the investigator who'd never given up on a case, never let a killer walk free. "Now it's personal," Marcus said, his voice carrying a coldness that made Williams's blood freeze. "You killed my family." The sound of footsteps on the cabin's front porch announced the arrival of backup that Williams couldn't control. Whatever happened next, the conspiracy that had protected Jake Morrison's killers for 15 years was about to be exposed. Rex's sacrifice had bought the time needed for help to arrive, for the truth to finally emerge. The German shepherd's final act of loyalty would be the key that unlocked justice for Jake Morrison and redemption for the community that had been poisoned by corruption for too long. The cabin door burst open as Sheriff's Deputy Maria Santos and 2 Montana State Police officers rushed inside, weapons drawn. They froze at the scene before them, Marcus cradling Rex's lifeless body, Williams standing with his smoking gun, Anderson wounded and conscious on the floor, and Bradley motionless near the overturned table. "Drop your weapons," Santos commanded, her service pistol trained on Williams. "Everyone on the ground now." Williams slowly lowered his gun, the fight seeming to drain out of him as he realized his carefully constructed world was collapsing. "It's over," he said quietly, almost to himself. 20 years of building something, and it's all over. Santos kept her weapon steady while one of the state troopers moved to secure Williams's gun. She'd been the first to respond to Helen Morrison's frantic 911 call about gunfire at Marcus Thompson's cabin. Santos had worked with Marcus during her early days on the force and respected the veteran detective's integrity. "Marcus, are you injured?" Santos asked, noting the blood covering his shirt. "It's Rex's blood," Marcus replied, his voice hollow with grief. "William shot him. Rex died protecting me." Helen Morrison appeared in the doorway, her face pale with shock. She'd been waiting outside while the officers secured the scene, but the sight of Marcus holding his dead dog brought tears to her eyes. "Oh, Marcus, I'm so sorry." Williams looked at Helen with something approaching shame. "Helen, Jake was a good man, a good cop. He didn't deserve what happened to him." "What did happen to him?" Helen demanded, her voice stronger than her trembling hands. "Tell me the truth, Bob. After 15 years, I deserve the truth." Marcus gently laid Rex's body on the floor, his hands shaking as he closed the German shepherd's eyes one final time. When he looked up at Williams, his expression carried the weight of accumulated grief and the cold promise of justice finally served. Jake discovered Chief Williams was protecting a drug operation, Marcus said, his voice steady despite the pain radiating through his chest. When Jake threatened to expose the corruption, Williams killed him and hid his body inside that oak tree on my property. Helen's knees nearly buckled as the words hit her. "You killed my husband? You killed Jake?" Williams nodded slowly, the admission seeming to age him decades in moments. "Jake was going to destroy everything. The operation we protected funded community programs, equipment for the department, improvements throughout Cedar Falls. He couldn't see the bigger picture." "The bigger picture?" Helen's voice rose to near hysteria. "You murdered my husband for drug money and you call it the bigger picture?" Santos had been recording the conversation on her body camera, ensuring Williams's confession would be preserved. "Chief Williams, you're under arrest for the murder of Detective Jake Morrison." As Santos began reading Williams his rights, Marcus stood on unsteady legs. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving him drained and hollow. Rex's death had torn open wounds that had barely healed from losing Sarah and Emma. The German Shepherd had been his anchor, his family, his reason for continuing when life seemed unbearable. "Marcus," Santos said gently, "we're going to need a full statement. But first, let's get you checked by the paramedics." "I'm fine," Marcus replied automatically, though his voice betrayed his emotional state. "Rex took the bullet meant for me. He saved my life." Helen Morrison moved closer, her eyes fixed on the fallen German Shepherd. "Jake would have done the same thing. He would have protected you, just like Rex did." The parallels struck Marcus with devastating clarity. Both Jake and Rex had died protecting others, sacrificing themselves for the people they loved. Both had shown the kind of courage and loyalty that seemed increasingly rare in a world compromised by convenience and corruption. As the paramedics arrived to treat Anderson's wounds and examine Bradley, who was unconscious but alive, Marcus found himself thinking about Emma's final words about getting a dog. She'd somehow known that he would need Rex's loyalty and love to survive the coming years of grief and isolation. "We found Jake's remains in the oak tree," Marcus told Helen, pulling Jake's badge from his jacket pocket. "Williams and his people had been watching me, waiting to see if I'd discover the truth." Helen took the badge with trembling hands, her fingers tracing the familiar number 247 that she'd memorized during 8 years of marriage. "He kept it," she whispered. After all these years, Bob kept Jake's badge. Williams, now handcuffed and seated on Marcus's couch, looked up with something approaching remorse. "I kept all their badges. Jake, Officer Martinez, Detective Fuller. I told myself it was to honor their service, but really, I think I kept them because I couldn't forget what I'd done." The admission revealed the scope of Williams' crimes. 3 other officers had died over the years, all because they'd threatened to expose the corruption that had poisoned the Cedar Falls Police Department. Marcus realized he'd been living and working alongside a serial killer who'd used his position to eliminate anyone who posed a threat to his criminal enterprise. Santos coordinated with the state police and FBI agents who were now arriving at the scene. The corruption case would require federal intervention, given the extent of local law enforcement involvement. Marcus's cabin became a crime scene processing center, with investigators documenting evidence and interviewing witnesses. "Mr. Thompson," said FBI agent Patricia Sullivan, who'd arrived within hours of the incident, "we've been investigating rumors of corruption in this area for months. Your discovery of Detective Morrison's remains may be the breakthrough we needed." Marcus looked down at Rex's body, still lying where he'd placed him on the cabin floor. "Rex found him. Rex led me to the tree, warned me about the danger. He died because he wouldn't let them hurt me." Agent Sullivan followed his gaze. "Your dog was a hero, Mr. Thompson. His sacrifice exposed a criminal conspiracy that's been operating for 15 years. As the day wore on, the full scope of Williams's operation became clear. Drug money had indeed funded community improvements, but it had also lined the pockets of corrupt officials throughout Cedar Falls. The investigation would ultimately implicate dozens of people, from city council members to business leaders who'd benefited from the arrangement. Helen Morrison sat beside Marcus on his front porch as investigators processed the scene inside. Both of them were emotionally drained, carrying grief that spanned decades. But there was also relief in finally knowing the truth. "Jake can finally rest in peace," Helen said, clutching her husband's badge. "And you can too, knowing you brought his killer to justice." Marcus looked toward the oak tree where Rex had made his final discovery. Rex deserves the credit. He never stopped trying to protect his family, right up until the end. The sun was setting behind the Montana mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Marcus realized that for the first time since losing Sarah and Emma, he felt something approaching peace. Justice had been served, truth had been revealed, and Rex's sacrifice had meaning that would endure long after the pain of loss began to heal. The German shepherd, who'd been Emma's final gift, had completed his mission, protecting his master and exposing the corruption that had claimed too many innocent lives. 6 months after Rex's sacrifice, Marcus Thompson stood before a crowd of 300 people gathered in Cedar Falls Memorial Park. The bronze statue beside him depicted a German shepherd in a protective stance, eyes alert, body positioned as if guarding something precious. The inscription read, "Rex Thompson, loyalty, courage, truth. A hero who gave everything to protect his family and expose corruption." The Rex Thompson Memorial K-9 Training Center had been funded entirely by reward money from solving Jake Morrison's murder case. The facility would train police dogs and pair them with officers throughout Montana, ensuring that the bond between humans and their canine partners would continue Rex's legacy of protection and service. Helen Morrison stepped forward to speak, her voice steady despite the emotion in her eyes. "Rex didn't just save Marcus that day. He saved our entire community by helping expose the corruption that had poisoned our police department for 15 years. My husband Jake would have been proud to serve alongside such a courageous partner." Marcus felt a familiar weight against his leg and looked down to see Junior, a 10-week-old German shepherd puppy with amber eyes remarkably similar to Rex's. The little dog had the same intelligent gaze, the same protective instincts already beginning to emerge. Junior wasn't a replacement for Rex. No dog could ever fill that void, but he represented hope, continuity, and the possibility of healing. Chief Williams and his co-conspirators had received lengthy federal prison sentences. The corruption investigation had ultimately implicated 17 people, including city officials, business leaders, and law enforcement personnel. The drug operation they'd protected was dismantled, with assets seized and redistributed to fund legitimate community programs. More importantly, the investigation had led to the discovery of 3 other victims besides Jake Morrison. Officers Martinez, Fuller, and Detective Sarah Chen had all been murdered over the years for threatening to expose Williams's criminal enterprise. Their families finally had closure, their names cleared of any suggestion of abandonment or cowardice. Marcus had been asked to consult on similar cold cases throughout the region. His experience uncovering Jake's murder, combined with his decades of investigative expertise, made him valuable to law enforcement agencies dealing with corruption cases. The work gave him purpose and kept Rex's memory alive through continued service to justice. "The bond between a human and their dog teaches us about unconditional love," Marcus said, addressing the crowd. "Rex never asked what was in it for him. He never calculated the cost of loyalty. He simply loved completely and protected fearlessly, right up until his final breath." Junior barked once as if understanding the significance of the moment. The crowd laughed, gently, recognizing the puppy's attempt to participate in honoring his predecessor's legacy. Agent Sullivan approached Marcus after the ceremony. "We've had requests from 3 other states asking for your assistance with cold cases involving police corruption. The Rex Thompson Foundation could become a national resource for exposing institutional wrongdoing." Marcus considered the offer while watching Junior explore the memorial park with boundless puppy energy. The German Shepherd's curiosity and courage reminded him so much of Rex's early days, when everything was an adventure to be investigated, and every person was a potential friend to protect. "Rex taught me that some crossings change you forever," Marcus replied. "You can't go back to who you were before, but sometimes that's exactly where you need to be." The ceremony concluded with the release of 17 white doves, 1 for each year that Jake Morrison's family had waited for answers. As the birds rose into the Montana sky, Marcus felt a sense of completion that had eluded him since losing Sarah and Emma. Rex's sacrifice had given meaning to all their losses, transforming grief into purpose. That evening, Marcus sat on his rebuilt cabin porch with Junior sprawled across his feet. The oak tree where Jake's body had been discovered was now marked with a simple plaque, "In memory of Detective Jake Morrison and all who seek truth in darkness." The tree had healed from the investigative cuts, new bark growing over the wounds, but the memorial would ensure Jake's story was never forgotten. Helen Morrison had become a regular visitor, often bringing her grandchildren to play with Junior, while she and Marcus shared memories of their lost loved ones. The friendship forged in trauma had evolved into something sustaining and healing for both of them. "Rex would be proud," Helen said during one visit, watching Junior attempt to herd her grandson around the yard. "He'd see that his sacrifice mattered, that it led to justice and healing." Marcus agreed, feeling Rex's presence and Junior's protective instincts and unwavering loyalty. The young German Shepherd had already shown remarkable intelligence and courage, traits that suggested he would carry on Rex's legacy of service and devotion. The investigation had revealed that Rex's exceptional ability to detect Jake's remains wasn't supernatural but biological. German Shepherds possessed extraordinary scenting abilities, and Rex had likely detected chemical changes in the soil around the oak tree caused by decomposition. His training as Marcus's companion had taught him to alert his master to anything unusual, making him the perfect partner for uncovering long-buried secrets. As winter approached, Marcus reflected on the transformations the past year had brought. He'd emerged from isolation to become an advocate for justice. His cabin had evolved from a refuge for grief into a center for healing and purpose. Most importantly, he'd learned that love didn't die with loss. It continued through the lives touched and the legacies left behind. Junior raised his head, ears pricked toward the forest, displaying the same alertness that had characterized Rex's vigilance. Marcus smiled, recognizing the genetic programming that made German Shepherds such exceptional guardians and companions. "What do you hear, boy?" Marcus asked, but Junior relaxed, apparently satisfied that whatever he'd detected posed no threat to his new family. The evening star appeared in the darkening sky, and Marcus remembered Emma's belief that people who died became stars to watch over those they loved. He liked to think that Rex had joined Sarah and Emma in that celestial protection, their combined love forming a constellation of guardianship over his remaining years. Letters continued arriving from families of missing persons throughout the country, people who hoped that Rex's story might lead to breakthroughs in their own cases. The Rex Thompson Foundation was processing dozens of requests for assistance, creating a network of investigators dedicated to finding truth in the coldest cases. Marcus understood that his grief for Rex would never completely disappear, just as his love for Sarah and Emma remained constant despite their absence. But the pain had transformed into purpose, the loss into legacy, the ending into a new beginning defined by service to others facing similar darkness. Junior stirred against his feet, settling into the comfortable weight that announced a dog's complete trust in his human. The gesture reminded Marcus of Rex's presence during the hardest nights of grief, when the German shepherd's warmth had been the only thing preventing complete despair. The cycle continued, love given freely, loyalty rewarded with protection, sacrifice transformed into meaning. Rex's story would inspire other partnerships between humans and dogs, other investigations into justice delayed, other victories of truth over corruption. As the Montana stars emerged in their ancient patterns, Marcus felt peace settle over his healing heart. Rex's mission was complete, but his legacy would continue through every case solved, every family reunited with truth, every bond forged between human and dog in service of something greater than themselves. Friends, this story reminds us that even in our later years, we can still make a difference. Marcus Thompson, at 58, had lost everything that mattered: his wife, his daughter, his purpose. But through Rex's unwavering loyalty and courage, he found the strength to seek justice and rebuild his life with meaning. This tale speaks to every one of us who has faced loss, betrayal, or the feeling that our best days are behind us. The truth is, your wisdom and experience are exactly what this world needs. Like Marcus, you have the power to stand up for what's right, to protect the innocent, and to leave a legacy that matters. Rex's sacrifice teaches us that love transcends death, that courage comes in all forms, and that sometimes our most important mission begins when we think our story is over. Your next chapter could be your most significant one yet. Questions for engagement. Have you ever had a pet whose loyalty and love helped you through your darkest times? What cause or injustice would motivate you to take action, regardless of your age? Share your own stories of loyalty, courage, and second chances in the comments below. Your experiences could inspire others to find their own path to purpose.